don't think any team is going to be willing to give anything up for him.
All right, I will give Stanley Johnson a 3, and the reason for this is because I think Detroit will be at least try to be active this trade deadline, and he is probably their best trade chip. I mean, outside of Luke Kennard, who I don't think they'll be looking to trade, he is their top trade chip. So I think if Detroit does make a trade, he will be involved in that trade. So that's why I will give this a 3, just because I think he's the most likely Piston to be traded. Moving on to Thon McCurr and his trade request. How likely do you think the Bucks are to grant his wishes? Oh, I'm sorry, am I going first here? I'm going first.
Okay.
I think with Thon McCurr, I think... I'm not sure. I think they will make a move. I think they will at least try real hard to make a move, but I think it might be more likely that Jason Smith is involved along with a second-round draft pick or 2. I will give Thon McCurr a 2. I think there's a 2 out of 10 chance here he gets traded, so I will give him a value of 2. How about you?
I mean, just because he requested a trade, I'm going to go a little bit higher, and I think Milwaukee might want to get rid of somebody who doesn't want to play there. And I think there's some value for a younger big guy who can stretch the floor out. So I'm going to give it a 3.
Okay. Sebastian gives it a 3. And we will move on to Terry Rozier from Boston. What do you think are the chances Terry Rozier gets traded?
I believe right now they're very low just because they have to look at him as an insurance for Kyrie Irving if he ends up leaving with all the new rumors surfacing and stuff. So I'm going to give it a 0 right now.
Same here. I don't think there's any chance he gets traded unless it's part of a big package for another superstar. Whether it's Anthony Davis or somebody else. I mean, Bradley Beal would have been a good option, but I highly doubt he gets traded anymore because of Washington's late surge. So I will give it a 0 as well. Like you said, they need an insurance policy for Kyrie Irving, so very unlikely he gets traded. Moving on to our next player, it is Wilson Chandler. Wilson Chandler from Philadelphia. If he does get traded, it will be obviously for an upgrade. He will be a salary filler, I should say, a salary throw-in to get somebody that they could get better alongside probably Markelle Fultz or their first-round pick. But how likely do we think Wilson Chandler is to be traded?
I'm going to argue it's about a 2. I don't think it's very high, just because I don't know what the option is for Philadelphia to be able to add another star or a better player.
I will argue that it's a little higher than that. I think Philadelphia. I mean, when we get to our teams that will be active, I think Philadelphia will be one of the more active teams during the trade deadline, and I think Wilson Chandler will be used as bait. So I will give this a 4. I think Wilson Chandler his value will be about a 4 that he gets traded, or the likeliness of him being traded. And then moving on to our next player, Markelle Fultz. How likely do we think Markelle Fultz is to be traded? I will start this one. Fultz, I'm not sure. I think that Philadelphia will do what they can to try to get some type of value for him now, just because they really do want to improve the roster, and I think they'll feel that pressure. However, I'm not sure which one of them between Fultz and Chandler is to be traded, but for Fultz, I'm going to go with a 3. I'm going to go with 3 for Fultz. I think he's a little less likely to get traded than Chandler, just because Philly might be a little more apprehensive to trade him because of his potential.
Yeah, I think Fultz is a little bit higher, I guess, than Wilson Chandler. But, I mean, I do see some teams being out there be like, you know what, we'll take a shot at him. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. So I will give it a 4.
Fair enough. And yeah, I mean, I think in terms of teams willing to give him a shot, I think there'll be at least a handful. Just the problem is how much will they be willing to give up in return? And I think that's where the problem might come in here. Moving on to Mike Muscala, who's on a $5 million contract. Again, a similar player to Wilson Chandler. He will be used as a salary filler if Philly figures out a way to upgrade the roster. Because of the fact that he is worth $5 million, he might be a little easier to trade. But how likely would you rank him to be traded on a
I'm going to
scale
go
of
the
0 to
same
10?
as Wilson Chandler, where I gave a 2. I don't know necessarily what the option is going to be out there. So, yeah, he'd have to be involved in the Fultz trade, but I could also see Fultz just being traded individually.
I'm going to go with a 4 here. I think I have him and Chandler both at a 4, but I think he's a little more likely to either be, like you said, a throw-in in a Markelle Fultz trade, or just a straight-up swap between the 76ers and another team, perhaps Cleveland and Rodney Hood, perhaps Dwayne Dedmon in Atlanta. But I think he's a little more likely to be traded. I will keep Wilson Chandler at a 4, but I think Muscala is fair at a 4 as well. Moving on to Norman Powell from Toronto. How likely do you think Norman Powell is to be traded?
I don't think the chances are very high. I do ultimately see the Raptors kind of staying pat. Maybe they want to get some bench scoring, but I don't know who you can get for Norman Powell, so I'm going to give it about a 2 as well.
Okay. Norman Powell gets a 2. I will give Norman Powell here I'm going to give him a 0 just because of his contract. I know he's still young. He's played well in the past. He's just the 4 years and around $10 million a year on his contract that remain is a little. I think if he does get traded, it'll be in the summer where he's part of a bigger package, perhaps for an Anthony Davis. But for right now, I don't think there's too much likeliness that he gets traded, unless maybe included in like a Marc Gasol deal if Toronto decides to go that route. But I'm not going to bet here. I'm going to take a 0. And move on to Rondae Hollis-Jefferson from Brooklyn. He will be a restricted free agent this summer. He's not the best modern day player in terms of him. He doesn't stretch the floor very well. He's not a good 3-point shooter. He does a lot of things well. He doesn't do anything great. He's a decent player. I just don't know whether he might be one of those candidates where Brooklyn just rescinds their qualifying offer to him. They'll probably give him a qualifying offer, but if they see other ways to improve, they're going to rescind that qualifying offer and let him become an unrestricted free agent. So why not get value for him now? For that reason, I will rate Rondae Hollis-Jefferson a 3, which I think might be a little too high, but I'm going to take a risk here and give him a 3.
Yeah, I'll give him a 1 just because I don't know what the necessary value is going to be out there for him, what teams are going to be willing to give up for Rondae Hollis-Jefferson.
Yeah, that's true. It probably won't be hard. It might be a high second round pick, but I don't see anything more than that. But who knows? I guess we always end up being surprised at the trade deadline. So you gave him a 1?
Yes.
1, okay. Our next player is Frankie Smokes from New York. Frankie Smokes, how likely do you think he is to be traded?
0. I believe
0.
There's no value out there right now for him. And obviously New York has taken themselves out of the trade for Anthony Davis, at least for now.
Yeah, and I'm going to give him a 0 as well, just because I think if he does get traded, they're going to save him for an Anthony Davis trade. So they could just even offer that as an option to New Orleans over the summer, along with Dennis Smith Jr., Kevin Knox, and whatever pick they get. So I think they will hold on to him and try to trade him if possible. If they do want to get rid of him, trade him during the summer. So I will give this a 0 as well. Don't want to take a risk with it. And we can move on to Emmanuel Mudiay, who will be also a restricted free agent this summer. He started off pretty well. I mean, he's still been playing decent. This is a hard one to gauge. Emmanuel Mudiay, I think the Knicks probably should get some value in return for him now, even if it is just a second-round draft pick. I mean, essentially use it as another trade chip. I don't see them holding on to him beyond this year, especially with Frankie and Dennis Smith Jr. on their roster. So I think he's extremely expendable at this point. I'm going to give him a pretty high score. I'm going to give him a 5. I think some team will have him on a bad second-round draft pick, and I think New York will be just fine getting rid of him for that. So I am actually going to take a risk here and give him a 5.
I'm going to go lower than that. I'm going to give him a 1. Again, it's just not a person that I believe is going to have a lot of value out there.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, but I think they have to get rid of him at this point. But you said
1.
Said 1. And now we can move on to Noah Vonleh from New York, who's on an expiring contract, a cheap expiring contract, playing really well for the Knicks. Could be a very nice bench piece for some team. How high do you rank Vonleh in terms of
I think he's performing well, and I think a team would want to get him, but I'm going to give it not higher than a 3 because I don't feel like New York is going to perform the right move here, and I know he's becoming a fan favorite, so I just don't trust New York in this deal.
Okay. Again, this is another player that I think is a little more likely to be traded. I will give him especially him, he should be traded. But they might also want to hold on to him because they won't have anyone. They could easily come to agreements on buyouts with Wesley Matthews and DeAndre Jordan if they don't swap them. So with him, I will give him a 4. I think he's a little less likely to be traded than Moutier just because of their roster crunch at the point guard position. And they might want to hold on to someone just to have someone on their roster. So moving on to Enes Kanter. How likely do you think he is to be traded?
Well, I'm going to go a little bit higher on Enes Kanter. Obviously, as an expiring, but I do think he produces. At least he scores and he gets rebounds. He's a good offensive rebounder, and I could see a team being able to use him. So I'm going to give him a 5 with some risk taking there.
Ooh, really? You think this is? I'm good. I'm going high here with Enes Kanter. I'm going to go high. I'm going to go 7. I am going to go 7. He's definitely, if he doesn't get traded, he's definitely a buyout candidate. So I am taking the risk here because his value might not be too high around the league. But I think he's likely to go. He's definitely going somewhere. I'm taking the risk here, whether it's on the trade market or whether it's after the trade deadline in the buyout market. So moving on here to Pau Gasol from San Antonio. I only threw him in here because Pau Gasol, if the Spurs do decide to actually make a trade, Pau Gasol will most likely be the salary filler in that deal. However, because of how unlikely San Antonio is to make a trade, I'm going to go with I'm debating between a 1 and a 0, but I'm not even going to risk anything. I'm going with a 0.
Yeah, it's a 0. He'd be a salary filler for sure, but he doesn't really give you much value, and I don't see the Spurs really making a trade, especially one that would be that much salary in it. So I'm going to give a 0 right here.
Okay, moving on to Brandon Knight from Houston. Where would you rank him on a scale of 0 to 10 on how likely he is to be traded?
Yeah, I don't see a lot of value again in Brandon Knight. I believe he has another year on his contract. So I'm going to give him a 0 as well.
Well, there's no value here, but he's their main trade chip in terms of, obviously, along with their first-round draft pick, he's their main trade chip. So you're sticking with your 0?
Yeah, because I would never call him a trade chip.
Well, okay, a salary filler. Okay, I'm actually going to go pretty high. I think Brandon Knight's been discussed in a lot of deals here. I think Houston, the only problem I have with Houston is their owner being so cheap. You talk how desperate you are to win a championship, but then you have teams like the Thunder willing to pay a huge luxury tax bill, but you're over there being extremely cheap and really wasting away Harden's prime here. I think the Rockets should be one of the most active teams. I think they should be the most active team in the deadline. I don't think they'll even be top 5. I think they might make one small trade, but that trade just might include Brandon Knight. I think they will trade Brandon Knight along with their first round pick. I'm going to go with a 6 here and see where we go from here and move on then to Marquese Chriss, another candidate to be part of any trade that Houston makes to improve their roster. And I think, again, here's a player that's very likely to be traded simply because if they do trade Brandon Knight for a player, they will more than likely ask any team that they're trading with to take on Marquese Chriss as well, simply to save him some additional salary, some additional money here, some additional salary cap. So I think that through a trade that they include a first round pick, they will ask another team to take